to walk you through how to find research articles at TAMUCT. So your professor may have asked you to find research articles. Now, keep in mind that the definition of exactly what a research article means may vary depending on the class and the professor and the assignment, but the goal of this is to give you a sense of what we may mean by finding research articles and where to find those sources. So most likely, what this means is peer-reviewed empirical research. And there's a couple of different ways of kind of thinking about this and identifying it. So I'm going to present this in a couple of different ways. But most of the time, what we mean is, first of all, it needs to be peer-reviewed. So what peer-reviewed means is that experts in the field have evaluated the article and provided them the author's feedback. The authors have revised it. It has gone through several iterations and editors have approved it. And so basically the experts in the field agree that this is quote unquote good research. So this is kind of the highest bar. And so generally, if you are doing a formal paper, what you're looking for is at the very least peer-reviewed work. Now, when we say empirical research, what we are talking about is that the article is presenting new research evidence. So generally, this means that the research was conducted by the person who wrote the article, which means that they gathered participants, they collected data, they analyzed the data, and they wrote up a summary of what they found. And that summary is the article that you're reading. So when we're talking about a peer-reviewed empirical research article, we want an article that is written by the authors who collected that data, did the analysis, and wrote it up. And then that write-up has been through the peer review process to be approved and published. Okay, so a research study is kind of another name for empirical. And so I think this infographic is kind of helpful in looking at how to identify whether you've got the right article. So first you want to look at the publication. So was it published in a scholarly publication called a journal? I'll show you how to filter those search results when we get onto the library website. But if it was published in a popular press, so a magazine or newspaper, then it's definitely not a peer-reviewed article. So you would not want to use it if you were asked for a research article. If it is published in a scholarly publication, you want to look for a couple of things. Does it have an abstract, a really short summary of an article? Then does it have a literature review? Sometimes a literature review will be called the introduction. Sometimes it doesn't have a heading, but it should start with a summary of what other people have done related to the area. If it doesn't start with a literature review with citations of other work in the area, it's probably not a peer-reviewed publication and you may be looking at a popular press article. If it does, you also want to look and make sure that they have cited references at the end. So they've acknowledged the people that have done the work. And then the question becomes, is it a primary research article or an empirical article? So is it written by the researcher that described or did the analyses? If not, it may be a literature review. We'll talk about that in a moment. If yes, some things that indicate that you found a primary research article or an empirical article is that it has a method section where they describe what they've done. It has a results section that reports the analyses that they did, and it has a discussion section that talks about the implications of what they found. And so you can kind of, if you find a potential article, you can walk through step by step to make a decision about whether you have actually met all of these criteria. Another way of thinking about this that our library likes to refer to is what's called an IMRAD article. Essentially, it's the same thing as the last infographic, but if you're looking for a research article, it should include an introduction, method, results, and discussion section, which gets that IMRAD acronym. So the introduction section, as I said before, won't always be labeled the introduction, but it will start out as a review of literature. The method section will include the participants, the measures, the procedure. The results section will describe statistical analyses, and discussion will say what they found. I will show you how to find sources on EBSCO in a moment, but be aware that EBSCO contains a lot of other types of sources. And depending on what your assignment is, these sources may or may not be acceptable. So if you're looking at peer-reviewed sources, even if it's peer-reviewed, it may not be empirical. So you may find peer-reviewed literature reviews, which basically summarize the state of the field and reference other articles. And so a literature review is very useful if you're looking for background information on a topic. A literature review can also be really useful for finding other empirical sources. If you look at their references, it can help you learn more about the topic or find other articles related to the topic. Another thing you might find in a peer-reviewed source is a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is kind of a gray area in terms of whether it's considered empirical or not, and so it may or may not work depending on the specific assignment. But what a meta-analysis is when a researcher collects a bunch of already conducted empirical studies and reanalyzes all of the data together. This is definitely useful for finding sources and background information. And may give you a sense of whatever the general topic area is. You also, though, sometimes find non-peer-reviewed sources that you need to use with a bit more caution. So dissertations often show up depending on your search criteria on EBSCO. So dissertations are most likely empirical. They do normally include newly collected data, but dissertations have not been through the peer review process. So they're generally not considered a good source. Again, they may or may not be acceptable, but generally I would not encourage using them. However, they can be a really useful starting place. You can look at their literature review and look at the references they cited, and that may direct you to some relevant articles. Finally, a popular media article is written by a journalist, not a researcher, but you may find a popular media article about a research article or a research project. So generally, because they're not peer reviewed, popular media articles are probably not acceptable, depending on the assignment, but you can go find the research article itself if you find a popular media article about the topic. Okay, so brief summary as you're doing searches, things to look for. You want a peer-reviewed journal, and I'll show you how to filter for that on EBSCO. You should look for an abstract. You should look for a method section. Does it include information about specific participants, measures, procedure, and so on? Does it have a results section that describes the statistical analyses they ran? Does it have a discussion section where they talk about the meaning of those analyses? And does it have a references section? Okay, so in terms of finding sources specifically at our library, I've got the website right here. And I've got kind of step-by-step information, but I'm going to walk you through. So I'm going to stop presenting and share my screen instead. Okay, so this is what the library website looks like. And the best place to find these sources is in the EBSCO database, specifically for psychology. The best place is EBSCO. So if we click on databases, and there's several ways you can get here, but here we've got A to Z, so we can search for E, and EBSCO host is what we want. If you are at home, you should still be able to access this, but at some point it may ask you to log in, so just be aware of that. This gives you a list of all of the databases. Now you can search all, you can select specific ones. If you search all, be aware that it will probably include some databases that have popular media articles that definitely aren't going to be appropriate. So generally what I recommend is we go down, they're roughly in alphabetical order by topic. So our psychology ones are down in P. There's 3 key ones that I always use: the psych articles, psychology and behavioral sciences collection, and psych info. Depending on your topic, if you have a more medical related topic, you may search some of the medical databases. If you have a topic that overlaps with sociology, there may be some other databases that are relevant, education, nursing. So it'll depend on your topic, but these 3 are always my starting point. If you're looking for a survey instrument, psych tests, APA psych tests is also a good resource. But again, these 3 are the 3 that I normally start with. And so once you've selected those, you continue, and it brings you to this EBSCO search field. So this is kind of the basic starting point for all of your searches. Let's say I want to look up some information about ADHD and memory. Okay. So there's a couple of things that I can do. Generally, I start out with the most broad. I don't select a specific field, although I could select keyword or something like that. And I just kind of start out like this and see what I can find. So I'm going to click search here, and you can see I found 3,568 results. So I may need to narrow it down a little bit more. There's a couple of things that I can do to filter it. So we talked about peer-reviewed journals. Almost always, if your professor asks you for a research article, they want something that's peer-reviewed. So we can go ahead here and click scholarly peer-reviewed journals, and that will filter out dissertations and things like that that are not relevant. Looks like that took out about 500 results. We could filter for full text because we are going to want the full text of an article, but sometimes there aren't full texts in EBSCO that we can still access, so I wouldn't recommend doing that. We might filter by date if there's a specific date requirement on your assignment, but in general, if I were here, I might add some more keywords to try to refine a little bit more, but let's just look at what we've got. So let's take a look at this third article here, memory capacity, selective control, and value-directed remembering in children with and without ADHD. Okay, so if we click on the article itself, we can see some basic information, and I'll do a separate video about making APA citations, but we can see all the information we need. We've got the authors, the source. So we've got the journal here. So if we wanted to look it up and confirm it was peer reviewed, volume, we've got the publication date and the page numbers. We've got some keywords here. So if you're struggling to find enough, you might take a look at keywords. If you found 1 or 2 articles, this is a good place to start looking. And then I have an abstract here. So the abstract is a really good starting place. It's a good hint that this is a peer review article and maybe empirical. And I often look at the abstract if I'm trying to filter out things that aren't peer reviewed. I'm trying to filter out literature reviews and meta-analyses. I can normally look at the abstract and figure out, hey, if I look, it mentions the method specifically in the abstract, and it tells me about specific participants, 6 to 9-year-old children with ADHD and without ADHD. That tells me that they collected data directly from these participants, which means it was probably an empirical article. And they also talk about significant between group differences, which is talking about their analyses. And so I have a pretty good hint that this is probably going to meet the requirements for a peer-reviewed empirical article. So that's kind of the first step, is you're looking at articles. Is it relevant? Of course, but also is it peer-reviewed and empirical? And normally you can get a sense of both of those things by reading the abstract. The other thing, so once you find a relevant article, you of course want to actually read it and save it. So the best way, if at all possible, you want to get the PDF copy of the article. Okay, so I can see here on the left side, once I've clicked on the article, it offers the PDF full text. I can also see if I go back to my results list, I don't even have to go click on the link to the article. I can get right to the PDF. And what I always recommend is, you never know, you're never going to remember exactly what you searched. You're not going to remember the key terms because you may do 5 or 6 different searches. You're probably going to forget. The best way to guarantee that you can get back to an article is to download and save the PDF copy somewhere where you know where it is. So please do that. As you're finding articles, make a folder on your desktop or wherever you save things and put all of the PDF copies of articles you think you might be interested in, put them in there. So when you have a PDF like this, you can click the download folder and you can see how I've saved articles. Save it. Generally, what I recommend saving it as is with information that you will need. So I save it as the author's first 2 authors' last names. So Castell and Lee, and then I save it as a year and some keywords so that when I look at the title of this, I can identify it. So something like memory capacity, selective attention, ADHD. Okay, so I look at this and I'll have a pretty good idea of what that article is about. Now I know exactly where that is saved and I can go back to it. So that's going to be key, making sure you can download and save it, and then you can read the article. Or if you want to find more, you can go back to your results list. I wanted to try to find one that didn't. Okay, so here's an example of an article that if we click on this, it seems to be pretty good. If I take a look at the abstract, I can see we've got some specific numbers of participants, which looks like it's probably an empirical article. We've got specific outcomes of statistics, which again tells me it's probably an empirical article. So I want this, but there's no option to go directly to the PDF. Our library has really great access through a full text PDF finder or full text finder. So if you click on that full text finder, it will actually search anything we have access to and tell you how to get that article. So normally, for example, this first link will probably take us to a website. It takes us directly to the PDF of that article. Okay, so now we've gotten access, even though EBSCO didn't have access to the PDF, we have access to this. So this is a huge advantage. Our library does a really great job of that. And so then again, the first thing I would do is download the article and save a copy of it. Okay, so I think that's all I wanted to show you. A couple of other things as you're searching, if you're not finding enough results, if sometimes when you start typing, EBSCO will help you fill it in. So maybe we want to search ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I'm not quite finding what I want, so I'm going to try either one of those terms and adjust it that way. So that should probably broaden our search. So we've got a couple more articles in there, but maybe we want to look at gender differences. So let's add another keyword. And we can see the number goes from 3,000 to 201. So you can see that so now we're looking for an article that talks about ADHD, memory, and gender, all three. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and go back to my PowerPoint for just a moment. And the last thing I wanted to comment on was just a couple of search hints. Okay, so make sure that if you're getting stuck, first of all, if you can find even one or two articles that are relevant, look at those, read those, look at their references list. That's a great way to find other articles that are relevant to the topic. Also look at the keywords. You might not quite have the right keywords for whatever concept you're looking at. And so if you look at the keywords, it's a great way to get, or the keywords of other articles, it's a great way to get ideas. Sometimes your search is too broad, right? Our first search I searched ADHD and memory. We had 3,500 results. You're not going to be able to filter through that. So you might need to try specific subtopics. So we added gender in there, or instead of just searching memory, I might search ADHD and short-term memory. Sometimes we have the opposite problem where your search is too specific, where instead of searching ADHD and memory, we've searched ADHD and the Stroop task and gender, right? So we've tried to find something very, very specific that we just can't find. So maybe we need to broaden it up a bit and search ADHD and executive function, or a term that is a little more inclusive, and then see if we can find differences. So this is just a matter of trial and error. Like I said, it's important to download PDF copies of any articles you find, because probably you will search several iterations of whatever your topic is before you settle on the article or articles that you need. So I hope this has been helpful, and please feel free to contact me if you have any other questions.